In the summer of 1945, while Europe celebrated victory over Nazi Germany, the Pacific still burned with battles, and Japan remained unyielding, refusing every call to surrender, choosing instead to fight to the last soldier, and often to the last civilian. Every island seized by the Allies had been turned into a graveyard, with Iwo Jima costing thousands of lives in brutal combat, and Okinawa becoming an inferno, where Japanese soldiers resisted to the very end, and families chose suicide over capture, showing the terrifying resolve of an empire unwilling to bow. Inside Washington, in rooms filled with smoke and silence, American leaders gathered around long tables, maps spread across the wood, casualty estimates written in cold numbers, and every voice that spoke carried the weight of thousands of lives that could be lost in a full-scale invasion of Japan. Harry S. Truman, only months into his presidency after Roosevelt's sudden death, sat in those rooms listening, his face solemn, his hands folded, his mind burdened by the fate of nations. For he knew the next decision he made would not only end a war, but change the course of history forever. The generals warned him with heavy words. An invasion of the Japanese mainland would be catastrophic. Rivers of blood would flow on both sides, and perhaps 500,000 American soldiers would perish, while millions of Japanese civilians would be swallowed in fire and destruction. Truman listened without interruption, his silence pressing harder than questions, until a folder was placed before him, sealed in secrecy, carrying a single name, known to only a few men in the world: the Manhattan Project. Scientists, hidden away in desert labs and mountain facilities, had achieved the unthinkable. They split the atom, unlocked the very fabric of nature, and built a weapon that could release energy more devastating than any firebombing raid ever carried out over Tokyo. The test of this weapon, codenamed Trinity, had taken place in New Mexico, where a flash brighter than the sun lit the desert sky, turning night into day, and a thunderous shock wave rolled across the earth, leaving soldiers and scientists stunned by what they had unleashed. Witnesses spoke of shadows burned into stone, of sand melted into glass, and of a mushroom cloud climbing into the heavens, a sign that mankind had entered a new and dangerous age, one from which there would be no return. Truman realized then that he held in his hands not just a bomb, but a power that could end wars in a single strike, or begin a nightmare that might consume the world itself. His advisors were divided, their voices clashing in heated debate. Some urged a demonstration on an empty island, hoping fear alone would compel surrender, while others insisted only the shock of real destruction could force Japan to its knees. The president weighed every word, but images haunted him. Rows of American coffins, the carnage of Iwo Jima, the burning hills of Okinawa, the blood of young men, spilled across beaches for every yard of land taken. At last, Truman broke his silence, his words slow but unyielding. We must end the war. We must save American lives. We will use the bomb. With those words, the decision was made, and the course of history was locked. For the atomic bomb would not remain a secret. It would be dropped, and the world would see its terrible light. Military planners now turned to the maps, searching for the target that would carry the message. Tokyo was already ashes, flattened by firebombs. Kyoto was spared, protected for its cultural heritage. But Hiroshima remained untouched, intact, alive. Hiroshima was no ordinary city. It was a military hub, home to army headquarters, munitions factories, and railroads that fed Japan's war machine. And so the generals circled its name and marked it as the chosen target. The weapon itself was prepared, a long, slender device, with wires and uranium packed within, given a name almost innocent in sound, yet deadly in meaning. Little Boy. The bomber to carry it was readied on Tinian Island, a gleaming B-29 superfortress, polished and primed for the mission, with a name painted boldly on its nose that would one day be remembered forever: Enola Gay. A crew was chosen. Young men sworn to secrecy, trained for months, but never told the full weight of their mission. Only that the success of this flight could bring the war to an end. Engineers tightened bolts, checked circuits, and sealed the bomb within its casing, while scientists whispered to one another, some with hope, some with dread, for even they were unsure what would truly happen when the weapon was released. There were fears whispered in the corridors that the chain reaction might ignite the very air, that the sky itself could burn. But still the mission pressed forward, unstoppable, driven by urgency, driven by war. In the camps and trenches across the Pacific, weary soldiers prayed that this weapon might spare them another landing, another beach soaked in blood, while others wondered in silence if humanity had stepped across a line never meant to be crossed. But history moves with a force that cannot be stopped, and the wheels of preparation turned without pause. The orders were signed, the bomber was readied, and the weapon that could destroy a city in seconds now waited for its hour. Thus, by the end of July, the decision was complete, the preparation finished, and the fate of Hiroshima sealed, as the world stood unknowingly on the edge of a dawn, unlike any it had ever seen. The mission begins. On Tinian Island, under the blazing Pacific sun, mechanics worked without rest, tightening bolts, checking engines, preparing the great B-29 that would carry a weapon unlike any other. The bomber was named Enola Gay, after the mother of its pilot, Colonel Paul Tibbets, a young man calm in appearance, yet carrying the heaviest burden of war. Around him, the crew trained in silence. Captain Robert Lewis as co-pilot, Major Thomas Farabee as bombardier, and a small team of men who knew their mission was secret, dangerous, and irreversible. In hangars guarded by soldiers with rifles, the bomb itself waited, a sleek cylinder, packed with uranium and fear. Its code name etched simply, Little Boy. Engineers handled it carefully, lifting it with cranes, sliding it into position. Each step watched with nervous eyes, for no one fully understood the monster they had created. Scientists whispered to one another. Some spoke of triumph, others of dread. One man muttered quietly, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Words from Scripture, now brought to life in steel and fire. The mission briefing was given in low voices. No questions allowed, only orders. Fly to Hiroshima, drop the weapon, return at once, and say nothing. That night, August 5th turned to August 6th. The crew tried to sleep. Some wrote letters home. Some stared at the ceiling, knowing tomorrow their hands would alter the fate of humanity. At 2:30 a.m., engines roared to life. The Enola Gay rolled down the runway, heavy with fuel, heavy with history. its wings trembling as it lifted into the dark Pacific sky. Other planes joined the mission. Weather scouts flew ahead. Observation aircraft followed behind. All eyes focused on Hiroshima, a city still sleeping, unaware of its fate. As dawn broke, the bomber flew steady, over islands, over waves, the ocean stretching endlessly below. The bomb bay doors closed tight on their deadly cargo. Inside the cockpit, sweat dripped. Hands tightened on controls. Voices crackled over radios. The crew spoke little. Silence heavier than words. Hours passed, clouds parted, and at last, Hiroshima appeared below. Calm, quiet, alive. Children walked to school. Workers cycled through streets. Women prepared breakfast, and soldiers moved through barracks. None looked up. None knew the sun itself was about to fall. At 8:09 a.m., the order came. Target in sight. The Enola Gay circled once, leveled its wings, and prepared for release. Bombardier Farabee adjusted the sight, his fingers steady, his breath slow. Colonel Tibbets gave the command, and the bomb bay doors opened wide. At 8:15 a.m., the weapon dropped. Little boy fell silently, twisting, tumbling, toward the city below. Inside the plane, the crew watched, their eyes fixed, hearts frozen. They knew the world would never be the same. 43 seconds later, the sun exploded over Hiroshima. At exactly 8:15 a.m., on the clear morning of August 6th, the silence over Hiroshima was broken. Little boy, the atomic bomb, fell through the sky, twisting slowly, cutting the air, heading toward its target. 43 seconds after release, it reached 600 meters above the city. And then, the world changed forever. A blinding flash erupted, brighter than 1,000 suns. For a fraction of a second, day became something beyond day. The sky itself seemed to ignite in white fire. At the epicenter, human beings vanished instantly. Shadows of their bodies burned into concrete walls, etched onto bridges, stamped into stone steps. The explosion consumed the heart of Hiroshima. Buildings collapsed in an instant. Wooden houses burst into flame. Tiled roofs shattered into pieces. A sphere of fire expanded outward, hotter than the surface of the sun. Everything within 2 kilometers was destroyed beyond recognition. People walking in the streets were burned alive. Children heading to school disappeared in a breath of heat. Families at breakfast became nothing but silhouettes of memory. The shockwave followed. A force like a giant's hand, sweeping across the city. Roofs were ripped off. Walls were crushed. Windows shattered into razor shards. Men and women were hurled through the air. Bodies thrown like dolls. Arms and legs broken against stone. Flames erupted everywhere. Clothing caught fire. Houses turned into furnaces. Smoke curled into the burning sky. The firestorm grew, sucking oxygen from the streets. People gasped for breath, lungs burning, as air itself seemed to vanish. Those who survived the flash stumbled half-blind. Their skin melted, hanging from arms like rags, their eyes swollen, their voices hoarse with screams. One mother searched for her child, but the child was ash. A soldier tried to lift his friend, but his friend's body crumbled in his hands. Witnesses later whispered, it was as if hell itself had opened over the city. Another survivor said, a city of life became a desert of death in seconds. Black rain began to fall. oily. Poisoned with ash and radiation, it stained the skin of the wounded, seeped into wells and rivers, spreading invisible death. The blast wave had flattened 70% of Hiroshima's buildings. Factories gone, hospitals crushed, schools turned to rubble. Children wandered in silence, their faces burned, their eyes staring without tears. Women cried out, holding babies lifeless in their arms. Men staggered, skin charred, voices broken. Animals too were caught in the fire. Birds fell from the sky. Dogs howled once and vanished. Horses collapsed in the streets. By midday, fires still raged uncontrolled. The city was covered in smoke. Black clouds rose high, turning morning into darkness. Doctors and nurses who survived treated the wounded with bare hands, torn cloth as bandages, no medicine, no hope. People begged for water. "Give me water, water," they cried. But drinking the black rain brought only more agony. Some survivors walked to the rivers, their bodies burned red and black. They collapsed at the water's edge and never rose again. By the end of the first hour, tens of thousands were dead. By the end of the first day, more than 70,000 lay still, and yet, for those who survived, the nightmare was only beginning. Invisible radiation seeped into their blood, into their bones, into their children, yet unborn. Hiroshima, a city that had lived for centuries, was destroyed in less than 1 minute. Its people, its homes, its heart, reduced to ashes. And above it all, the mushroom cloud rose higher and higher, a towering column of smoke and fire, climbing into the stratosphere, a signal to the world that humanity had entered the atomic age. When the flash faded and the roar subsided, what remained of Hiroshima was a wasteland of fire, ash, and silence. The city that had once held 350,000 souls now lay in ruins, its heart torn out, its people broken beyond recognition. Survivors crawled through the rubble, searching for family, crying out names, but receiving no answer. Only echoes among the ruins. Children wandered aimlessly, their skin burned, their eyes blank, their voices calling softly. Mother, father. Hospitals that once stood ready were now destroyed. Doctors buried beneath rubble. Nurses burned at their posts. Medical supplies vanished in the inferno. Those few who survived treated the wounded with bare hands, strips of cloth for bandages, bowls of muddy water for relief. The streets were filled with shadows of the dead. Bodies lay charred and twisted, some still clutching the hands of loved ones, others frozen in silent screams. The stench of burning flesh hung heavy in the air, carried by the wind through shattered homes and broken shrines. At the riverbanks, hundreds gathered, desperate for water, their skin blistered, their clothes gone, their eyes hollow. One after another, they collapsed at the water's edge and never rose again. The black rain fell harder, dripping onto wounds, soaking through open flesh, poisoning even those who had survived the fire. It carried invisible death, radiation, a force unseen that crept silently into blood and bone. Men staggered through the ruins, whispering prayers. Women clutched lifeless children, rocking them as if sleep would return. The city groaned with the sound of the dying, thousands upon thousands, each breath a struggle, each cry fading into silence. Eyewitnesses recalled the horror. A teacher said, "The students were gone. Only their shadows remained on the walls." A soldier whispered, "The city disappeared." And so did my entire unit. By evening, fires still raged. The glow of Hiroshima could be seen from miles away. A red horizon, marking where life had ended. Smoke climbed into the heavens, the mushroom cloud drifting slowly, a symbol of devastation the world had never known before. American pilots watched from the sky, stunned by the scale of destruction. Co-pilot Robert Lewis wrote in his logbook, trembling, "My God, what have we done?" Words that echoed across the ages, words of victory and words of guilt. In Tokyo, the government was silent. Reports were confused. Few understood what had happened. Some believed Hiroshima had been destroyed by thousands of bombs. Others whispered of a single weapon, a sun unleashed by man. Emperor Hirohito was informed. His advisors debated. Some demanded continued resistance. Others urged surrender. But in Hiroshima itself, there was no debate, only agony, only death. That night, survivors lay under open skies, the city still burning. They heard cries all around, voices fading in the darkness. Some prayed for rescue. Others begged for death to come quickly. By the next morning, rescue teams entered the ruins. Soldiers, doctors, volunteers. But they too were overwhelmed. The heat still rose from the ashes. Bodies lined the streets. Survivors reached out with trembling hands. "Help me. Water." Yet many who were helped died within hours, their wounds deep, their bodies poisoned by radiation. No medicine could heal them. No prayer could save them. By the third day, Hiroshima was silent again. Only smoke and the dead remained. The cries had faded. The city was gone. And across the ocean, in Washington, the news spread. The weapon had worked. The mission was a success. But behind the celebration, behind the pride, a question began to rise. What had mankind unleashed? And could it ever be contained again? When the first reports reached Washington, the message was clear. The weapon had worked. Hiroshima was gone. The mission was declared a success. The generals smiled. The president nodded. But behind the official words, a heavy silence lingered. President Truman addressed the nation, his voice steady, his eyes hard. "We have used against those who brought war to the Pacific a new and revolutionary bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe. We shall continue to use it until Japan surrenders." To the American people, the news was both triumph and shock. Some cheered in the streets, believing the bomb had saved the lives of soldiers who would never have to storm Japan's shores. Others whispered uneasily, wondering if mankind had gone too far, if this was not victory, but the opening of something darker. In Tokyo, confusion spread. Government ministers argued over what had happened. Some believed 1,000 planes had bombed Hiroshima at once. Others feared it had been a single weapon, a sun brought down by American hands. Emperor Hirohito listened in silence. His advisors divided. General Anami insisted Japan must fight on, that surrender was dishonor. Others begged for peace, warning that another city might vanish next. Meanwhile, in Hiroshima itself, the reality was undeniable. Survivors wandered like ghosts. Messengers carried news to the capital. The city is gone. Everything is destroyed. tens of thousands are dead. When Tokyo received the full report, disbelief turned to dread. The Japanese High Command realized if one city could vanish in seconds, another might follow tomorrow, and another after that. Around the world, newspapers carried headlines in black ink. New weapon destroys city in seconds. Atomic bomb unleashed. A sun explodes on Earth. The world gasped. Scientists shuddered. Politicians debated. Priests prayed. Winston Churchill wrote later, "This revelation of the atomic bomb was the greatest of all revolutions. It may shorten the war. It may end wars altogether. Or it may destroy us all." In Moscow, Joseph Stalin pretended calm, but behind his eyes was calculation. He had already ordered his scientists to build a bomb of their own. The race for nuclear power had begun, a race that would divide the world for generations. In Tokyo, even as leaders argued, a second shadow hung over them. For American bombers were preparing another mission, another city, another fire. The Japanese people heard rumors. Some dismissed them. Some believed them. But in their hearts, a question echoed. If Hiroshima is gone, what will be next? And far away, on the island of Tinian, crews loaded another bomb, this one larger, deadlier, given a name of dread, Fat Man. Its target was Nagasaki. The world had changed forever, and yet the fire had only begun to spread. Nagasaki, for what he would say. In the days after Nagasaki, Japan stood at the edge of the abyss. 2 cities, erased in fire, tens of thousands dead, hundreds of thousands suffering, a nation broken. Inside the Imperial Palace in Tokyo, silence hung heavy. Ministers argued, generals shouted, some demanded continued resistance, others begged for peace. But the Emperor, Hirohito, listened quietly, his face pale, his voice unspoken. Finally, he rose, and with words never before heard from a Japanese emperor, he declared, "We must endure the unendurable. We must suffer what must be suffered. The war must end." On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito spoke directly to his people by radio. His voice was calm, distant, but filled with sorrow. For the first time, the Japanese people heard their emperor admitting defeat, calling for surrender. Across the nation, people wept, some in relief, some in despair. Soldiers bowed their heads. Civilians knelt in silence. The long war, the war that had consumed the world, was over. In Washington, in London, in Moscow, the news spread like wildfire. Crowds filled the streets. Church bells rang. Soldiers embraced. Strangers danced. The Second World War, the deadliest conflict in human history, had ended. But in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there was no celebration, only ashes, only silence, only shadows where lives had once been. Doctors studied the survivors, discovering strange new illnesses, hair falling out, skin bleeding without wounds, fevers that killed slowly. Radiation sickness had entered the world. Writers and journalists arrived, their pens shaking as they tried to describe what they saw. Photographs were taken, images of burned children, of melted buildings, of a city turned to dust. The world shuddered. The world asked, "What have we done?" For the first time in history, mankind had split the atom in anger. For the first time, one city had been destroyed by one weapon. And for the first time, humanity realized it now had the power to end itself. The legacy of Hiroshima and Nagasaki spread far beyond Japan. Nations raced to build their own bombs. The Cold War began. The shadow of nuclear fire stretched across the globe. Yet, in the ruins of Hiroshima, survivors planted trees, rebuilt schools, rebuilt lives. They carried scars, but also voices. Voices that cried out for peace, for a world without more Hiroshimas. Each year, bells ring in Hiroshima, prayers are spoken, flowers placed on memorials. Children learn the story, so they will never forget, so they will never allow it again. And historians remind us that the atomic age began not with science alone, but with fire, with suffering, with decisions made in fear and hope. As President Truman once said, "We used the bomb to end the war, to save lives." But survivors answered, "Yes, the war ended, but look at the price. Look at the ashes. Look at the children." Hiroshima and Nagasaki remain warnings carved into history, not just about war, but about power, about choices, about what it means to be human. The sun burned over Hiroshima once. May it never burn that way again. And now, to you, the viewer, the listener, what do you think? Did the atomic bomb truly end the war? Or did it begin a new one? A war that still waits in the shadows of our own time?